Okay, so this video is going to focus on analysing Kandinsky's yellow, red and blue from a subjective frame perspective. So just a reminder, the subjective frame has to do with things like emotions, feelings, mood, all those kind of more personal aspects of a work. It's not an indulgent thing where you just kind of say how the work makes you feel. Like anything in visual art, we have to be able to justify why we've said a certain thing. We can't just pull it out of thin air and say that it's a fact. So anything we say, we need to justify, and it needs to be justified by things like elements that we've looked at from the structural frame, but also by referencing what we know about the artist's context, which we've had a look at. So there's going to be a series of questions here which we'll go through, and I'll explain the answers I've given in relation to the work, which is you can see on the left hand side here. So as we always do, putting the name of the work, the title and the year, and again we've said it's not a site-specific work, and we've also emphasized here again that it's a mid-sized work, so it's not large scale or small, because sometimes those things do contribute to how we read it. If it's a large work, we can see it as, making the audience feel small, or if it's a small work, it really draws the audience in and makes them look closer. So this is just a regular mid-sized work. All right, so the first question here you'll see from a subjective frame perspective is, what is my first impression and what am I reminded of? So I've written my answer here. I'm kind of using this as a model or an example. So that, when you write your answer, you're writing it in a way that kind of thoroughly answers that question and answers it properly. So what I've said here is, my first impression when looking at this painting is that the painting is inspired by music, and this interest has been reproduced in an abstract and almost psychedelic way, which we can see here. There's use of abstraction, there's really kind of unnatural or unrecognizable colours in terms of what they relate to in real life. There's various shapes, forms have been reduced or completely distorted. So that's where I'm coming from there. The figure on the left-hand side, which we looked at in the structural frame analysis, so that kind of reference to the human head, has been fractured and disassembled, barely recognisable as a human form, although we can see some elements that lead us to believe that it is a human form. And then the music on the right-hand side, we think it's music which has been represented in a visual way, and this has been done through swirling, gyrating, oscillating and twirling rhythmic kind of shapes and forms that kind of melt into each other but are also distinct at the same time. So I'm reminded of the immersive nature of music and how we can become lost in it. So it is a really immersive thing, there's no reference to real life. It's as if the artist has been so immersed that they've kind of moved away from, or they've got lost in their own imagination to an extent. So that's just my response. You feel free to write whatever whatever your first impression is or what you're reminded of, but just keep in mind that you need to justify it by pointing to elements of the work, or pointing to what you know about the artist, their background, their style, and their influences as well. So I've got some more questions here. What can you see? Does the title give you any insights into the work? So the title's yellow, red and blue. And I've said here, the title only really gives us a small insight into the work. While it literally describes some of the colours used in the artwork, we can see yellow, red and blue here, there is more to it, and that's typical of the titles that Kandinsky uses. So the three colours, which are primary colours that are in the title, they've been used in the work, but so too have some secondary colours such as purple, orange, green, and some tertiary colours as well. So there's some browns here which are kind of tertiary colours, and of course black. I've said here the three colours in the title are the base of all the other colours. So from those three colours, any other colour can be made. And are in a sense the beginning of the evolution of other colours used in the work. So given Kandinsky's love of music, he may be referencing music in this title. So he might be drawing a reference or a analogy, I guess, between music and art. So I've said here, while colours have a base, so too does music. So there's, things that, even though music is very distinctive in its different styles, there are things that form the basis of it, musical notes, timing, all those kind of things. And that he might be drawing an analogy between those. So I've said here, while colours have a base, so too does music. And it can evolve in a similar way to colour. So literally in this case, Kandinsky can literally see the connection or the analogy between music and art there. And he's represented that visually here. Name all the things you can see in the artwork. So in the artwork, we can see various lines, colours, shapes, and forms. There are some slightly recognisable forms, such as the human face and the deconstructed musical symbols. However, many of these shapes have been heavily abstracted and are not really identifiable as objects. So they just become more, compositional devices rather than recognisable objects, although he has left some clues there, so some slightly recognisable shapes and objects. Those musical clefs, the staffs, and obviously the human form as well. I've ignored that colour because I think we covered that pretty well in the structural frame video. When I say colour, I should say we've ignored this question here, the third one. So what emotions and or experiences does the artist want to express and how? So this is, you're going to have to use your knowledge of the artist and his influences, which we've looked at in some detail, to answer this question. So I've said here, this artwork seems to express the immersive and transformative nature of music, how music can remove us from reality and take us into our own imagination. It also seems to present music as a joyful and possibly spiritual experience. And then I've gone on to explain why I think that. So the colours used in the work are light and non-threatening, so they're light-hearted. They're not really like kind of ominous, dark tones that kind of give us a more foreboding feeling. So the use of pastel, washed-out yellows, purples, reds and blues gives the painting an almost dreamlike appearance, building on the idea that music can transform us and take us away from reality. The heavily and in some cases totally abstracted shapes and forms are representative of being totally immersed in music and the experience of hearing music. While Kandinsky specialised in abstraction, it's also a fitting medium for this work, as abstraction and the visual representation of music seem to really, really connect with each other in a very successful way. Those kind of bursts of colour, those recognisable shapes that disappear and mould into other less recognisable shapes. There's a really strong analogy there between sound and music and obviously visual art there. So how is the personality of the artist conveyed? I think we've covered that when we talk about the influence of the work, the influence of music on the work. The next question here is, how crucial is imagination to the production of the artwork? So I've said it here, imagination is crucial to this work in a number of ways. Firstly, the artist's imagination in representing a piece of music through visual language, such as line, colour and shape. I should say it is important. When the audience looks at the work, they can almost hear the music that inspired it. So that, imagination is really important there. And the second part of the, how I think imagination is important in relation to this work is that, the work kind of requires the imagination of the audience to put themselves in Kandinsky's shoes and kind of see where he was coming from with this, And by using our imagination, we can almost hear the music that created the work as well. And I think an important or helpful thing that I've included below this video is another video of one of Kandinsky's favorite composers that inspired a lot of his artworks, called Arnold Schoenberg. So have a listen to, it's only a 4-minute clip. Have a listen to that while looking at this work and see if you can see some of those influences there, and see if your imagination can kind of put together some of these shapes with some of the notes that you hear in the music. Finally, this last question here. So discuss the importance of the artist's individual style in communicating this. When I say communicating this, I've kind of taken that as meaning communicating meaning in the work. And, you know, when we're looking at this style here, we're kind of looking at it in comparison or in reference to other artists who are making similar work at the time. So I've said here, you know, the artist's style is important, and it's definitely evident in this work. And a big part of this goes to the approach or the influence, or the reference point at which the work begins. So while the work does share similarities with other artists of the time, such as the suprematist artist Kazimir Malevich, in that there is an abstraction of shapes and forms to the point that they're unrecognizable, Kandinsky's work goes a step further. So I've said here, while other abstract and minimalist artists of the time were concerned with abstracting or reducing real objects and forms to the point that they became unrecognizable, Kandinsky made real something that was not already visible. So while all of these artists had a preoccupation with things such as composition, color, line, shape, and form, their approaches were slightly different. So Kandinsky's work was inextricably linked to music, and a major intention of his was to make the invisible yet transformative nature of music visible through the medium of painting, and in particular abstract painting. So what I mean by that is that a lot of artists, you know, would start off with a picture or a scene, and they would take elements of that and abstract it until it became unrecognizable, but it was a exploration of color, line, shape, composition. So Kandinsky kind of started from a different reference point. So he'd start off with, you know, a piece of music which isn't visible, and he'd make that into a visible form, such as the one that we can see here on the right-hand side of this painting. So, I mean, there is definitely references to other artists' style. You know, at the end of the day, Kandinsky was making work at a time that other artists were making work as well, so there's bound to be connections in style. However, I think it's important to distinguish the starting point of different artists. So other artists such as Malevich started off with real scenes and minimalized and abstracted them down, where Kandinsky started with an invisible influence, which is music, and he turned that into a visible thing. So look, that's it for the subjective frame. Make sure you fill out this form or this worksheet, and really important, make sure you justify all your answers by referencing the artwork and referencing your knowledge of the artist's history.